my name is Simone and welcome to my channel, Solar Simone Astrology. I am an astrologer who's been practicing for nearly 7 years, focusing on traditional Hellenistic astrology. And today I'm here to talk to you about the decans. Today, I chose our 3 movies based on the 3 different decans of Aries. If you don't know what a decan is, it is a division of each zodiac sign by 10 degrees. Each zodiac sign has 3 different decans, and they're all ruled by a certain planet and represented by a tarot card. The sources I use for information about the decans include Austin Coppock's 36 Faces, T.S. Chang's blog posts about the decans and their tarot card associations, and the Fixed Sign podcast. Is one which Austin Coppock calls the Axe. This decan is ruled by Mars and is represented by the tarot card, the Two of Wands. For this decan, I chose to talk about Mad Max, Fury Road. If you haven't seen this movie, it came out in 2015 and is essentially about a guy named Max, obviously, as he navigates a post-apocalyptic world and the warlord who keeps him captive. He meets Furiosa, a fugitive of the warlord, and together they form an alliance in order to build a new, a better, and brighter future together. So that was a nice little spoiler-free review. Luckily this movie, I think I can kind of explain how it relates to Aries 1 without, giving too much away if you haven't seen it yet. But basically, obviously besides it being a relatively violent film, The Axe is all about, as a decan, is all about division, splitting, divisiveness. I think of the word to cleave. That's very much the energy that Aries 1 is giving. Very much the idea of forging a new path by cutting away the grass or the brush or anything that's in your path to be able to blaze ahead. And that's very much what Max and Furiosa do throughout the course of the movie. They're very determined. They very much care about protecting their loved ones, but they also very much are about blazing ahead and, burning anything in their path, if necessary, to be able to create this new, brighter future. And I feel like that very much describes the decan of Aries 1. Also, there's an association with Two of Wands. It's very much like the world is kind of in the palm of your hands. In the Two of Wands, you can see, presumably, a man staring out into the beyond, having 2 staffs on either side of him. And he also is holding a globe or a ball in his hand. Now this kind of showcases his authority, his power. Even though his back is turned to us, there's a certain level of trust and power in there, as he's kind of assessing the new possibilities of the world that he wants to explore and also potentially help to build and be a part of. Aries 1 is also about how violence is sometimes necessary in order to create a new world and to forge a new path. Very much thinking about revolutionary wars and protests and all those sorts of things. It's very much about violence is necessary in our world sometimes, but the most important thing about violence is that it should be assured and should ultimately have a purpose. Butchering an animal has the purpose of eventually eating it so that, it can feed multiple people. However, just killing an animal and leaving it to die is ultimately senseless and not really about the vibes that Aries 1 wants to create. Ultimately, Aries 1 is about divisiveness. It is better to choose a path and to forge ahead than to be stuck in the middle or stuck and unsure about what you should do continuing forward. Ultimately, a lack of divisiveness is kind of what can hold people back. And so it's important that Aries 1, if you have the sun in this decan or if you have any planets in this decan, for you to kind of really embody that bold, powerful energy. Let's talk about Aries 2, the crown. This decan is ruled by the sun, and it also is represented by the 3 of Wands in the tarot associations. This place is also where the sun has exaltation degree of 18 or 19 degrees of Aries. So basically, to talk more about this, so the sun is the leader of the zodiac. It illuminates everything. It's also literally where we all revolve around the sun. We can't live without the sun. It is the life giver. However, the sun also does have a little bit of what we call malefic properties in terms of if you get too close to the sun, you burn up, you die, not so fun. However, since the sun is, like I said, the king, it represents authority, it represents enlightenment, it represents like divine wisdom, all those great things. The sun also does, and it also represents individuality. The sun represents our drive, our egos, our vitality, our sense of life itself. This is also why the sun does amazingly in Aries. Aries is all about individual freedom and expression. It also is about, like I said in the last decan, forging a new path. In Aries too, the sun really embodies the sense of sovereignty and of having power to be authoritative. And sovereignty is really about, creating the rules for a new world. If Aries 1 was about cutting a new path and forging a new future, Aries 2 is like, okay, now that you have this new power and now that you've actually been able to create your own world, what do you do for it? How do you express your authority? How do you express the rules that this world should be living in and create? And so that's why the sun does really well in Aries 2. It's all about power and embracing it and embracing your own authority. This is also why I chose the movie Hereditary. Now, if you've seen Hereditary, it's a 2018 film made by Ari Aster about a family that goes through an intense series of traumas. Now, if you've watched the movie, you might be thinking, okay, how does this relate to the sun? How does this relate to sovereignty, etc.? Annie's mother, as you found out, is a sort of a leader. She is able to achieve her main goal throughout the film, like I said, even though she has passed, and even though it seems like she wouldn't have that much power, being 6 feet under and all. However, you'll learn that that is not really the case. So that was my spoiler-free review of Hereditary and how it relates to the Aries 2 decan. However, I do feel like in order to explain it in depth or really kind of convey my point, I will need to say some spoilers. So if you're really interested in watching the movie, I really highly insist that you watch this movie kind of going into it without a lot of knowledge prior to really get the peak viewing experience. So I do insist that you skip over this part because I'm about to talk about some really intense spoilers for this movie. I will put a timestamp below of when you can go on to the next section. Hereditary has many themes, mainly family, trauma, grief, and mental illness. The theme of sovereignty does come into play. Annie's mother is the leader of a cult and is also known as Queen Lay by her followers. Additionally, the cult's main goal is to summon Payman, one of the kings of hell, who will supposedly bring untold riches to those who accomplish this. So right already, there's this theme of, wanting to create your own world and wanting to invent rules about how, you were living in your own reality and own destiny. So much of Hereditary is about power and about sovereignty and about authority. Unfortunately for the family of Annie, Peter, Charlie, and Steve, I think is the husband's name, they have none of it. They're not really in control of their lives. They're very much kind of operating lack of a sense of willpower. However, because they have such a lack of power, the power now is kind of shifted to people, the outside forces outside of their family, namely being, Annie's mother, Queen Lay, the cult in and of itself, and also ultimately Payman because he's getting what he wants at the end. A big part of Aries 2 is controlling your own destiny and the power of what it means to rule. While the fates of the central family are out of their hands, Annie's mother and Payman show remarkable power that transcends time, space, and even death. Alright, so that's it for the spoiler part of talking about Hereditary. Let's move on and talk about Aries 3, The Burning Rose. Aries 3 is also known as the Burning Rose. That is what Austin Coppock calls it in 36 Spaces. So this decan is ruled by Venus, which is really interesting because Venus is actually in detriment in Aries. So Venus actually doesn't really do super well in Aries. That's also because Venus rules over Libra, which is Aries' opposite. So this decan is really interesting because it does inherently talk about a contradiction. This decan is ruled by Venus. However, like I said, Venus does not do that well in Aries. It's basically kind of like Venus is trying to, plant flowers on a battlefield. The energy is disconnected. and it doesn't really make sense. Venus likes nice things. For the most part, she likes harmony, she likes present sound. She does not like the screams of dying soldiers, which Mars, of course, revels in. Deacon is also represented by the Four of Wands in the traditional tarot associations. So the Four of Wands is really interesting. A lot of people think that it represents a wedding when you look at the images. If it doesn't represent a wedding, it generally represents a happy family celebration. T.S. Chang talks about how the Four of Wands represents celebration itself, not necessarily what happens after. So it's more about the wedding and not about the marriage in itself. T.S. Chang talks about how this wedding, represented by the Four of Wands, is actually a marriage between the Emperor, which is represented by Aries, and Venus, which is represented by the Empress. We usually don't have a lot of things that would necessarily bring them together. This is the time in which the Emperor is humoring the Empress, and they're having this grand celebration. It's talking more about a fleeting moment of happiness than it really is talking about a long-lasting, happy, successful marriage between two people who are aligned. Austin Coppock also mentions that the burning rose as a deacon represents the power of art to make humiliation go away. This is why I'm going to be talking about Scott Pilgrim versus the world in my analysis of Aries 3. Scott Pilgrim has two goals in this movie. First, to win a competition to get a record deal, and two, to date Ramona Flowers. However, both of these goals become increasingly difficult to achieve as Scott must battle Ramona's 7 evil exes, all while competing in a battle of the bands that will jumpstart his band's career. So that's a nice little cute synopsis. I kind of joke about how I think this movie definitely does represent Venus and Aries, just the whole idea of like battling your lover's exes to be able to like win love. It's just so much of, like I said, both what Venus and what Aries represents together. Venus, like I said, she isn't always wanting to go to war, but she definitely will. And I also kind of think about that whole cliche, you know, all is fair in love and war, and kind of like how both of those can be a battlefield in their own different kind of ways, and also those kind of can have both of those being battlefields that have different set of rules, especially love, because they're so close to the heart. So now I'm going to get into some relatively intense spoilers for the movie, especially about the last part of the movie. So if you want to watch Scott Pilgrim without any prior knowledge of how it ends, I highly recommend that you skip over this next section of what I'm about to say, and then I will provide some timestamps below so you can be able to skip and then continue on to the end of this video. Like I said, Venus and Aries being in detriment as an energy kind of represents having to work harder to kind of get what you really want to achieve. Basically kind of like having to work in circumstances that are not familiar to you at all. So basically Scott Pilgrim is kind of waging a war for Ramona in these circumstances that are unfamiliar to him and that is kind of difficult for him to achieve. He's a little bit of the underdog in this type of situation, especially even in the Battle of the Bands. His band is also a little bit of an underdog in that as well. And so that kind of also does describe the Venus and Aries energy. T.S. Chang says, perhaps two forces, love and war, can never truly be reconciled. While fighting Ramona's last ex, Gideon, Scott is killed and then brought back to life after Ramona learns that he cheated on her with his ex, Knives Chow, thus losing both of his lovers at the end. However, that's not actually how it ends. At the end of the movie, him and Ramona seem to reconcile as Knives kind of forgives him for cheating and kind of says, hey, maybe I'm not the person for you, but maybe Ramona is. So there is potentially a happy ending at the end of the story. Thank you for watching this video. I really hope that this cleared up what the decans mean and also what each of the 3 decans of Aries represent. If you have any questions or if there's anything confusing about this video, please let me know below in the comments. Also, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. It would help me so much as I get started on this channel. And finally, do you guys have any movies beyond the ones that I talked about that represent Aries season to you? Bonus points if you can include what decan you think that they represent. Anyway, it was so nice chatting with you guys. Talk to you guys next time.